Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, way back, to a realm where the whisper of silk robes replaced the rustle of your modern bedsheets, and the soft glow of oil lamps chased away the oppressive darkness. Imagine, if you will, the cool, polished stone beneath your bare feet as you pad through echoing palace corridors, the air thick with the scent of sandalwood incense and something else. Something faintly metallic, perhaps the lingering aroma of ceremonial bronzes. You hear the distant clink of a guard's armor, the muted chirping of crickets from manicured gardens, and the soft, rhythmic breathing of an empire that dreams alongside its ruler. You're about to explore the bizarre, fascinating, and often surprisingly relatable sleep habits of ancient Chinese emperors. And trust me, after tonight, your own cozy bed might feel less like a sanctuary and more like a bland, uninspired rectangle. Q probably won't survive this without a few yawns. But hey, that's the goal, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on the precipice of history, peering into the very first glimpses of organized sleep within the embryonic stages of Chinese civilization. Even before the grand dynasties, when small, localized states began to coalesce, the concept of a ruler's sleep was imbued with a significance far beyond mere biological necessity. Think of it not just as rest, but as a performance, a spiritual act, a prognostication. In these nascent societies, the leader was often seen as the direct conduit between the heavens and the earth, and their well-being, including their sleep, was intricately tied to the prosperity of the entire realm. If the ruler slept poorly, perhaps the harvests would fail, or floods would ravage the lands. You feel the weight of that responsibility settling onto your shoulders, even as you simply observe the earliest records, often etched onto oracle bones during the Shang Dynasty c. 1600 to 1046 BCE, hint at divinatory practices surrounding the king's health and, by extension, his sleep. You can almost hear the crackle of a heated ox scapula, the shaman interpreting the fissures to determine if the king's slumber would be peaceful, or if malevolent spirits might disturb his rest. It wasn't enough just to feel tired. The very act of sleep was a cosmic barometer. Imagine the pressure, every snore, every toss and turn, potentially a sign of cosmic imbalance. Historians still argue whether these divinations were genuinely believed, or simply a tool for maintaining social control and reinforcing the king's sacred status. Either way, it profoundly shaped the expectations around royal bedtime as you move. Through the centuries, you notice a distinct evolution. During the Zhou Dynasty c. 1046 to 256 BCE, the concept of the mandate of heaven truly solidifies. This wasn't just a political philosophy, it was a cosmic contract. A ruler, the Son of Heaven, governed with divine approval. But this mandate could be revoked if he became tyrannical, or, crucially, if he failed to maintain cosmic harmony. And what better indicator of harmony, or lack thereof, than his ability to rest? You envision elaborate ceremonies performed before dusk, designed to ensure propitious energies for the king's chamber. Incantations would be whispered, offerings made, all to invite peaceful, restorative sleep. It's almost as if they had ancient ASMR practitioners, but instead of whispering into a microphone, they were chanting to the heavens. The furnishings of these early royal sleeping quarters were far from the plush, gilded beds you might imagine. In these foundational eras, simplicity, combined with spiritual potency, was key. You see platforms raised off the damp earth, perhaps woven from reeds or humble wood, designed for ventilation and protection from creepy crawlies. Imagine waking up to a scorpion in your ear. The bedding itself might have been simple straw mats, perhaps covered with coarser fabrics, though even then, quality would have varied based on status. It wasn't about comfort in the modern sense, but about utility, symbolism, and a connection to nature. Think of it as ancient, ergonomic design, but with a side of spiritual warding. A quirky tidbit from this era. Some early texts suggest that rulers would sometimes sleep near flowing water or have small indoor fountains, believing that gentle, continuous sound would ward off evil spirits and promote restful sleep. So, before sound machines became a thing, ancient Chinese emperors were already dabbling in white noise. You can almost hear the gentle trickle mixed with the distant sounds of a nascent civilization. It's a far cry from your Rain Sounds app, but the intention was remarkably similar. The physical arrangement of the bed was also often subject to early geomantic principles, even before feng shui became a codified system. You see the nascent ideas of aligning the bed with cardinal directions, avoiding direct drafts, and placing it to maximize positive ki. It wasn't just where you laid your head, but how and where your head was laid. You imagine advisors poring over diagrams, meticulously calculating the optimal position for the royal bed, lest a misalignment lead to restless nights, bad dreams, or worse, a decline in imperial fortunes. This meticulousness underscores the belief that the physical environment profoundly influenced one's spiritual and physical state, especially for the Son of Heaven. You observe that the routine surrounding sleep was also becoming more formalized. Even in these early periods, there would have been strict protocols for attendance, how quietly they moved, how they prepared the sleeping chamber when they were allowed to enter and leave. You can feel the hush fall over the inner court as night approached, the entire palace holding its breath for the emperor to finally retire. It was a delicate dance of subservience and unspoken reverence, every movement calculated to not disturb the imperial repose. This laid the groundwork for the elaborate, often stifling, court etiquette that would define later dynasties beyond the physical space. The concept of sleep as a time for spiritual journeying was also taking root. Shamans and early philosophers taught that dreams were not mere random firings of the brain, but messages from ancestors, deities, or even glimpses into the future. Imagine, as an emperor, every dream potentially carrying the weight of a divine prophecy or a warning from beyond the grave. You might wake up in a cold sweat, not from a nightmare about a forgotten meeting, but from a vivid dream about a celestial dragon, wondering what it portended for your reign. This made sleep not just a passive state, but an active, even dangerous, realm of consciousness. The transition from these early, fragmented states to the more unified dynasties brought with it a further refinement of these sleep-related beliefs and practices. As power centralized, So too did the ceremonial aspects of imperial life, including the act of slumber. The emperor was not just a powerful individual, he was the embodiment of the state, and his sleep became a microcosm of the kingdom's stability. You understand now that even in these ancient times, the rulers, despite their immense power, were not immune to the universal human need for rest. However, their rest was never truly their own. It was always intertwined with the destiny of their people, a silent, nightly vigil for the empire. As these early dynasties solidified, the sheer scale of the imperial court grew. No longer just a handful of trusted advisors and family members. The emperor's immediate retinue began to swell with eunuchs, concubines, physicians, and various functionaries, all of whom played a role, however minor, in the emperor's nightly routine. You can almost hear the soft padding of many feet, the hushed whispers, the subtle movements in the outer chambers as the time for the emperor to retire drew near. This intricate ecosystem, centered around the imperial bedchamber, was a defining characteristic of later Chinese imperial life, and its roots lie firmly in these ancient times. The emperor's sleep was never a solitary act. It was a carefully orchestrated ballet involving dozens, if not hundreds, of individuals. You sense the profound isolation even amidst such an extensive support system as the emperor finally lay down alone with his thoughts and the weight of his realm. Now, as we glide forward from the proto-dynastic mists, you find yourself hurtling towards one of the most pivotal and, frankly, terrifying figures in Chinese history, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor who forged a unified empire from warring states. His reign, to 21 to 210 BCE, was a whirlwind of monumental ambition, relentless control, and an obsession with immortality that profoundly shaped his sleep or lack thereof. Imagine the man who built the Great Wall and the Terracotta Army. Do you really think he had time for a leisurely 8 hours? Spoiler alert, he did not. You stand within the nascent, yet already immense, palace complex of the Qin capital, Xianyang. The air, even then, hums with a tension born of absolute power. Qin Shi Huang was a man driven by a singular, unyielding vision to create a unified, eternal empire, and for himself, an eternal life. This pursuit of immortality wasn't just a philosophical fancy. It was a daily, consuming quest that dictated every aspect of his existence, including his nightly rituals. You sense his restless energy, even in the quiet of his private chambers. Sleep, for him, wasn't just rest. It was a vulnerability, a time when his enemies, both mortal and spiritual, might gain an advantage. His belief in achieving immortality led him down some truly bizarre paths. You can almost see him, the most powerful man in the world, poring over ancient texts, consulting alchemists, and dispatching expeditions to distant lands in search of elixirs. This was no gentle stroll in the park. We're talking about a man who, legend has it, sent thousands of young men and women on a quest for the mythical Penglai Island, believed to be the home of immortals, never to return. And what does this have to do with sleep? Everything, if you believe that eternal life is just around the corner. Why waste precious hours in unconsciousness? Sleep was, for Qin Shi Huang, an irritating necessity, a brief hiatus from his grand designs. He saw it as a weakness to be minimized. You hear whispers from his court, tales of an emperor who barely slept, driven by an almost manic energy. He was known to work through mountains of documents, weighing bamboo slips of official reports until he had processed a specific, enormous weight of them each day. Imagine that workload. It makes your inbox look like a tiny paper airplane. This wasn't just diligence. It was an attempt to outrun the clock, to cram more life into every waking moment. The sleep environment of Qin Shi Huang, despite his immense wealth, was likely more functional than luxurious. You don't envision plush carpets or silken canopies. Instead, think of a practical, austere chamber, perhaps with a sturdy, unadorned bed. The emphasis would have been on security, accessibility for his trusted advisors, even in the dead of night, and a clear space for his constant work. You might spot stacks of bamboo slips near his bed, always ready for him to resume his imperial duties the moment he awoke, or even when he couldn't sleep. A mainstream historical fact about Qin Shi Huang is his notorious fear of assassination. This paranoia deeply impacted his sleeping arrangements. He would famously sleep in different rooms each night, seemingly at random, a strategy to confuse potential killers. Imagine the logistics for his attendance. Each night, a different chamber would need to be prepared, secured, and made ready for the emperor's brief slumber. You picture eunuchs silently moving, bedding, lighting lamps, and ensuring every corner was meticulously checked. This constant shifting meant that true, deep relaxation would have been incredibly difficult to achieve. How can you truly unwind when you're constantly wondering where you'll be sleeping next, and if that place is truly safe? And here's a quirky tidbit to further protect himself. Qin Shi Huang was said to have had secret passages and hidden escape routes built into his palaces. Some accounts suggest that certain sleeping chambers were merely decoys, designed to mislead assassins while the emperor slept elsewhere, perhaps in a simpler, less obvious room. You feel a shiver run down your spine, imagining the elaborate network of hidden spaces, the constant vigilance, the emperor forever looking over his shoulder, even when trying to rest. It's the ultimate sleep hack for paranoia. Never let them know your next move, even if that move is just to your pillow. This intense drive for immortality also manifested in his diet and medicinal consumption. He regularly consumed elixirs, concocted by his alchemists, many of which contained mercury. Yes, mercury. You recall your modern chemistry lessons and shudder. This toxic substance, believed to grant eternal life, likely had the opposite effect, causing severe neurological damage, irritability, and, ironically, insomnia. You picture the emperor, twitching and agitated, his mind racing, unable to find peace even when his exhausted body craved it. This self-inflicted poisoning almost certainly exacerbated his sleep issues, trapping him in a vicious cycle of chemical-induced wakefulness and the desperate search for a magical cure. Historians still argue whether Qin Shi Huang's mercury poisoning was the primary cause of his increasingly erratic behavior and early death, or if his tyrannical nature was already inherent. What is clear, however, is that his quest for immortality directly undermined his ability to achieve natural, restorative sleep. His body was a laboratory, and the experiments were often deadly. The concept of imperial rest under Qin Shi Huang was less about recuperation and more about strategic downtime. He saw it as a necessary evil, a brief pause before resuming his relentless pursuit of control and eternity. There was little room for leisure or personal indulgence in his life, and certainly not in his sleep. His days were rigidly structured, and his nights were extensions of that structure, filled with vigilance and the echoes of his grand plans. You sense the sheer exhaustion that must have permeated his very being, a fatigue that no amount of power could alleviate. His rule was characterized by strict legalism and harsh punishments, creating an atmosphere of fear throughout the empire. This external pressure surely contributed to his internal unrest. If the empire was a reflection of its emperor, then the widespread fear and rigid control outside the palace walls must have seeped into his private moments, making peaceful slumber an elusive dream. You feel the heavy, oppressive silence of a palace where even the air feels constrained. When he did sleep, it was likely fitful and short. The constant fear of rebellion, the immense burden of governing a newly unified, vast empire, and his personal obsession with Deathall would have conspired against truly restful sleep. You imagine him waking abruptly, his mind immediately leaping to the day's tasks, or perhaps to the latest intelligence reports from his spies. There was no gentle transition from sleep to wakefulness. It was a stark, almost violent re-entry into the demanding reality of his imperial role. The very idea of a sleep schedule for Qin Shi Huang seems almost laughable. It was more a whenever my body collapses schedule, punctuated by bursts of activity and driven by an insatiable ambition. His physical health undoubtedly deteriorated from this lifestyle, accelerating his demise. The irony is poignant. In seeking eternal life, he hastened his own end, largely by sacrificing the fundamental human need for restorative sleep. As you step away from the specter of Qin Shi Huang, you carry with you the understanding that for some emperors, sleep was not a luxury, but a battleground. For the first emperor, it was a battle he constantly tried to avoid, minimize, or even conquer through unnatural means. His legacy of restless ambition and the tragic irony of his pursuit of immortality serve as a stark reminder that even absolute power cannot defy the basic requirements of the human body. He built an empire that lasted, but his body certainly did not, largely due to his peculiar, desperate attempts to cheat sleep and death. The silent, eternal sentinels of the terracotta army stand testament not only to his power, but also to his profound, sleep-deprived anxiety about the end. Leaving behind the restless, mercury-addled slumber of Qin Shi Huang, you now drift forward through time, across a brief, chaotic interlude, to arrive at the vast and enduring Han Dynasty, 206 BCE to 220 CE. Here, the imperial approach to sleep undergoes a fascinating transformation. The brutal pragmatism of the Qin gives way to a more nuanced, philosophical, and, frankly, mystical understanding of the nocturnal world. For the Han Emperor's dreams were not just random neurological phenomena. They were sacred messages, prophetic visions, and direct communications from the heavens themselves. You sense a shift in the palace atmosphere, from a tense, almost breathless vigilance to a quieter, more contemplative air, though still laden with immense responsibility. Imagine yourself in the grand, sprawling palaces of Chang'an, the Han capital. The architecture is more refined, the courtyards more expansive, and the living quarters, while still designed for security, feel a little less like a military bunker and more like a home, albeit one for the Son of Heaven. The Han emperors, drawing heavily from Confucianism, Taoism, and the emerging understanding of yin and yang, viewed the universe as an interconnected web. And in this cosmology, dreams held immense power. If the emperor dreamt of a dragon, it might foretell prosperity. A nightmare, perhaps a warning of rebellion or natural disaster. You feel the weight of expectation on these emperors, not just to govern well, but to dream well. Mainstream historical fact. The Han Dynasty saw the formalization of dream interpretation as a legitimate, even crucial, aspect of imperial governance, no longer just the domain of local shamans, court dream interpreters, or menshi became official positions. These were highly respected scholars and diviners, tasked with deciphering the emperor's nightly visions. You can almost see them, scribbling on bamboo slips, meticulously cross-referencing dream symbols with ancient texts and astronomical charts. Imagine their job interview. So, can you tell me what it means if I dream of a giant peach? The stakes were incredibly high, as their interpretations could influence major policy decisions, military campaigns, or even the choice of an heir. This wasn't a whimsical hobby. It was serious business. An emperor might wake in a cold sweat from a dream, immediately summon his menshi, and demand an interpretation before even breaking his fast. You picture the hushed, urgent consultations in the pre-dawn light. The dream interpreter meticulously listening, perhaps asking probing questions about the emperor's emotions within the dream, the colors, the sounds. Every detail mattered, for within lay the hidden will of heaven. A quirky tidbit. There are recorded instances of Han emperors taking specific actions based on their dreams. For example, Emperor Wu of Han reigned 141 to 87 BCE. A particularly ambitious and superstitious ruler, was said to have made important decisions regarding campaigns against the Jiannu nomadic tribes after significant dreams. One account describes him dreaming of a golden man, which was later interpreted as a sign of a new, powerful deity to be worshipped, influencing his religious policies. You shake your head, thinking how surreal it must have been to have state policy dictated by whatever your subconscious coughed up overnight. Forget polling data, just ask the emperor what he dreamt about. The imperial bedchamber itself reflected this emphasis on spiritual and cosmic harmony, while Qin Shi Huang might have favored pragmatic, secure sleeping spots. The Han emperors sought balance and auspicious alignment. You imagine rooms designed according to nascent feng shui principles, with the bed positioned to capture benevolent qi. Screens might have been used to deflect negative energy, and specific colors or materials chosen for their symbolic meanings. The beds themselves were likely more comfortable than those of the Qin, perhaps raised platforms adorned with fine silks and brocades, reflecting the Han's growing prosperity and sophisticated aesthetics. It's less about hiding and more about attracting good vibes. The routine around bedtime would have been a blend of practical preparation and spiritual ritual. You picture concubines and eunuchs preparing the chamber, ensuring the air was purified with fragrant incenses, often made from rare herbs or resins, believed to calm the mind and invite auspicious dreams. Lamps would be carefully dimmed, not extinguished entirely, as total darkness might invite malevolent spirits. The silence would be profound, broken only by the soft rustle of silk or the gentle breath of attendants. For the Han emperors, sleep was a journey, a nightly descent into a realm where the mundane boundaries of the world dissolved. It was a time for receiving divine guidance, for communing with ancestors, and for understanding the deeper currents of the cosmos. This perspective made sleeplessness or restless nights not just a personal inconvenience, but a potential sign of cosmic disharmony, or worse, divine displeasure. Imagine the pressure on the imperial physicians and dream interpreters if the emperor consistently suffered from nightmares. Their careers, and perhaps their lives, would literally hang in the balance. The role of imperial physicians in managing the emperor's sleep also became more formalized during the Han. They weren't just treating physical ailments, they were also prescribing remedies for a troubled mind and restless spirit. You envision herbal concoctions, often infused with ingredients like calming jujube seeds or mind-clearing ginseng, specially prepared to induce peaceful, prophetic dreams. These aren't just sleepy teas, they're elixirs designed to open the channels of divine communication. Historians still argue whether these remedies were genuinely effective or primarily served a psychological purpose, reassuring the emperor that steps were being taken to ensure his auspicious slumber beyond dreams. The concept of yin and yang heavily influenced the Han understanding of sleep. Nighttime, as the domain of yin, was a time for quiet introspection and the gathering of essential energy. Waking hours, the domain of yang, were for action and outward projection. To balance these forces, the emperor needed proper rest. An imbalance, leading to insomnia or oversleeping, was seen as a disruption of cosmic order within the emperor's own body, which in turn could ripple out and affect the harmony of the empire. You feel the constant striving for balance, the underlying philosophy that permeated every aspect of Han life, even sleep. The Han dynasty also saw the rise of more detailed record-keeping, while no direct sleep diaries of emperors survive. Court historians often noted significant dreams and their interpretations, treating them as important historical events. This suggests that the imperial dream life was considered public, or at least politically relevant, information. You imagine future historians poring over these records, trying to piece together the psychological landscape of these powerful rulers, often through the lens of their nocturnal experiences. Even the death of an emperor could be framed in terms of his final sleep. Accounts might speak of a peaceful passing, suggesting a life well lived and a harmonious transition to the afterlife, or a tormented final sleep, hinting at unresolved issues or a troubled conscience. The narratives around imperial demise were carefully constructed, and the nature of their final repose was a crucial element in shaping their legacy. So, as you slowly leave the tranquil, dream-laden chambers of the Han emperors, you carry with you a sense of the profound intertwining of the spiritual and the mundane. For these rulers, sleep was far more than just a biological necessity. It was a conduit to the divine, a canvas for prophecy, and a reflection of the cosmic harmony of their reign. Their dreams shaped policy, their rest determined fate, and their nights were often as active and significant as their days. You marvel at how deeply ingrained these beliefs were, shaping not just what they did while awake, but what they experienced while profoundly asleep. It makes your own dreams of forgetting to wear pants to work seem utterly trivial by comparison. As the grand, unified Han dynasty eventually fractured, you find yourself hurtling into a period of intense fragmentation and martial prowess, the Three Kingdoms, period 222 to 80 CE. This era, immortalized in countless novels, operas, and even video games, was a crucible of ambition, betrayal, and relentless warfare. For the leaders of this tumultuous time, figures like Cao Cao, Liu Bei, and Sun Quan, sleep was a strategic commodity, often snatched in brief, desperate bursts, and always overshadowed by the looming threat of battle or political intrigue. Forget serene dream interpretations. Here, sleep was about survival. You stand on a windswept battle plain, the air thick with the memory of clashing steel and the roar of thousands. The very landscape feels volatile, mirroring the precarious existence of the rulers. In an era where alliances shifted like desert sands and a wrong move could mean annihilation, deep, uninterrupted sleep was a luxury few could afford. These weren't emperors born into the purple of a stable dynasty. They were warlords who clawed their way to power, constantly fighting to maintain it. Mainstream historical fact. One of the most famous anecdotes from this period revolves around Cao Cao, the shrewd and often ruthless warlord who laid the foundation for the state of Cao Wei. He was notoriously suspicious and often feared assassination, even from his own trusted retainers. To protect himself, he was said to have slept with a dagger under his pillow and, even more famously, would issue a warning: "I can kill people in my sleep." This wasn't just a threat, it was a psychological tactic. He once reportedly killed an attendant who had tried to cover him with a blanket when he felt cold, only to later feign regret, reinforcing the idea that disturbing his sleep was literally a fatal mistake. You feel a chill, imagining the sheer terror of being an attendant to such a man, wondering if his next twitch was a genuine movement or a deadly act of calculated deception. This story, whether entirely true or embellished, perfectly encapsulates the paranoia and constant vigilance that defined imperial slumber in this era. For these warlord emperors, the battlefield was often their bedroom, or at least their immediate surroundings. You picture makeshift camps, tents pitched under the stars, the ground hard and unforgiving. The luxury of a dedicated, tranquil sleeping chamber was often replaced by a temporary canvas structure, permeable to the sounds of horses, distant drums, and the anxious murmurs of soldiers. Sleep wasn't about comfort, it was about functional recovery, a quick recharge before the next strategic maneuver or morning skirmish, a quirky tidbit that highlights their adaptability. Due to constant campaigning, many leaders became adept at taking short, powerful power naps whenever and wherever possible. There are accounts of generals learning to sleep while riding horseback or during brief lulls in battle, leaning against a tree or even on their shields. Imagine mastering that skill, the ability to mentally switch off amidst chaos, to grab a few minutes of unconsciousness before the next wave of spears. You might struggle to sleep on a plane, and these guys were snoozing in the middle of a war zone. This wasn't a lifestyle choice. It was a matter of survival, a testament to their physical and mental endurance. The concept of a sleep schedule for these leaders was utterly fluid. Their days and nights were dictated by military exigencies, a sudden enemy movement, an urgent message from a scout, or the need to plan a dawn attack could shatter any hope of continuous sleep. You imagine them constantly on edge, their minds racing with strategic calculations, even as their bodies cried for rest. The lines between waking and sleeping blurred, often leaving them in a perpetual state of semi-exhaustion. The nature of their bedding would have been basic in most cases. Simple mats, a thick blanket, perhaps a small, hard wooden pillow. Comfort was secondary to portability and practicality. When traveling, they would sleep on whatever was available, a simple cot, a pile of straw, or even directly on the ground. The grandeur of the Han palaces felt light years away. Here, survival stripped away all non-essentials, including excessive comforts for sleep. The presence of guards was paramount. Unlike Qin Shi Huang's ever-shifting rooms, the Three Kingdoms leaders relied on a tight, heavily armed perimeter. You see elite personal guards, often veterans who had fought alongside their lord for years, standing silent vigil just outside the tent flap, their hands never far from their weapons. The sounds of their patrol, the rhythmic clang of their armor, would have been the constant lullaby for these leaders, a paradoxically reassuring presence amidst the pervasive danger. Historians still argue whether the extreme paranoia exhibited by figures like Cao was a genuine psychological affliction or a shrewd tactic to maintain discipline and prevent any thought of treachery among his subordinates. Regardless, it undeniably impacted his ability to achieve peaceful, restorative sleep, forcing him into a state of hypervigilance, even in his most private moments. The psychological toll of constant warfare, the endless calculations of strategy, and the ever-present threat of betrayal must have created a profound internal restlessness that even deep exhaustion could not entirely overcome. Dreams, for these leaders, were less about cosmic messages and more about practical omens or psychological reflections. A dream of defeat might trigger a revaluation of battle plans, while a dream of victory might bolster morale. They were not interpreted with the same philosophical depth as in the Han. Rather, they were treated as immediate feedback from their own minds, or perhaps simplified messages from minor deities. It was about raw information, not profound revelation. The political landscape also influenced their sleep patterns. Consolidating power, maintaining loyalty among often treacherous subordinates, and constantly monitoring rivals meant that leaders like Liu Bei or Sun Quan would have had little time for true rest. Their bedtimes would often stretch into the early hours of the morning, consumed by council meetings, strategy sessions, or the review of intelligence reports. You imagine them working late into the night by the flickering light of oil lamps, their faces etched with fatigue, their minds sharp but weary. The brief periods of peace, if they occurred, offered little respite. The calm before a storm could be even more nerve-wracking than the storm itself, filled with anxious anticipation and meticulous preparation. Even during these lulls, a leader's sleep would be light, easily disturbed, ready for immediate action at the first sign of trouble. The concept of unwinding after a long day was simply not on the menu. The legacy of the Three Kingdoms leaders, particularly in their approach to sleep, highlights a fascinating human adaptation to extreme circumstances. They forged empires, not from secure thrones, but from the saddle, the battlefield, and the fleeting moments between campaigns. Their sleep, brief and precarious, was a mirror of their lives, constantly interrupted, fiercely guarded, and always a means to an end. It makes you appreciate your own ability to simply lie down without fearing a dagger under your pillow, or a sudden cavalry charge when you next feel restless in your bed. Perhaps remember these iron-willed individuals and the true meaning of a hard day's and hard night's work. Emerging from the gritty, war-torn landscape of the Three Kingdoms, you now find yourself transported to an era of unparalleled cultural fluorescence and cosmopolitan splendor. The Tang Dynasty, 618 to 907 CE. If the Qin was about stern efficiency, and the Han about cosmic dreams, the Temps was about lavish refinement, artistic brilliance, and a truly imperial lifestyle. For the emperors of this golden age, sleep wasn't merely a biological function or a strategic necessity. It was an elaborate ritual, a performance steeped in luxury, comfort, and sometimes hedonistic indulgence. You sense an immediate shift in the atmosphere. The tension of constant warfare gives way to a decadent calm, though beneath the surface, palace intrigue always simmered. You stand within the magnificent Daming Palace in Chang'an, the largest palace complex in the world at the time. The air is thick with the scent of exotic spices, fine silks rustle past, and the distant sounds of court music drift from opulent halls. Here, emperors cultivated an image of divine authority through an embrace of grandeur, and their nightly routines were no exception. Their sleeping chambers were not just functional spaces, but showcases of wealth, artistic taste, and meticulous attention to comfort. Mainstream historical fact: Temps emperors, particularly during the dynasty's peak, under rulers like Emperor Taizong and Emperor Xuanzong, resided in bedchambers that were veritable works of art. You envision massive, intricately carved wooden beds, often lacquered in brilliant reds and golds, adorned with flowing silk draperies woven with auspicious motifs. Like dragons and phoenixes, the bedding itself would have been a testament to luxury. Layers of soft silk quilts, embroidered pillows, and even cushions filled with aromatic herbs, believed to promote relaxation and ward off illness. This was not just a place to sleep. It was a carefully curated environment designed to soothe the senses and reflect the emperor's unparalleled status. Think of it as the imperial equivalent of a 7-star hotel suite, but with far more history and significantly less mini-bar. The concept of bedtime rituals for Temps emperors went far beyond simply slipping into pajamas. You picture an elaborate sequence of preparations, often involving dozens of palace staff. Before the emperor retired, the bedchamber would be meticulously cleaned and purified. Incense burners, fashioned from precious metals, would gently waft fragrant smoke throughout the room. Sandalwood, agar wood, or musk, chosen not just for their scent, but for their calming and purported health benefits. The temperature of the room would be carefully regulated, perhaps with braziers in winter or cooling basins in summer. The entire process was designed to create an atmosphere of profound tranquility and opulence. A quirky tidbit that showcases this indulgence: Temps emperors were known to have elaborate sleeping pavilions or rest chambers within their extensive palace gardens. These weren't just bedrooms. They were often standalone structures, perhaps beside a tranquil pond or amidst a bamboo grove, designed for a change of scenery and an even deeper connection with nature for restorative sleep. Imagine having not just one bedroom, but multiple, bespoke sleeping spaces designed to maximize your relaxation. You can almost hear the gentle splash of water from a nearby fountain, designed to create a natural ASMR effect before ASMR was even a concept. It suggests that even amidst the formal court life, there was a recognition of the need for mental and environmental variety to achieve true rest. The role of concubines in the emperor's nocturnal life also took on a more formalized, almost ceremonial aspect during the Tang. Unlike the raw necessity of three kingdoms, here their presence was part of the imperial luxury. You envision a designated concubine, chosen for the night, or sometimes several, attending to the emperor, perhaps fanning him, offering warmed wine, or simply providing a comforting, submissive presence. While their primary role might have been companionship or procreation, their presence also contributed to the overall atmosphere of pampered ease in the imperial bedchamber. The choice of who would share the imperial bed was often a complex dance of power, favor, and personal preference, influencing palace dynamics significantly. Imperial physicians, too, adapted their practices to this new era of luxury. Their prescriptions for sleep were often sophisticated herbal mixtures, incorporating rare and expensive ingredients, prepared with exquisite care. They might also suggest specific diets, therapeutic massages, or even particular breathing exercises, all aimed at inducing a peaceful, deep slumber for the Son of Heaven. The focus was on holistic well-being, ensuring the emperor's body and mind were in perfect harmony to receive the benefits of rest. Historians still argue whether the apparent decadence of some Tang emperors, particularly later ones like Su, who became infatuated with Yang Guifei, contributed to a decline in their actual governance and vigilance. While the opulence of their sleep rituals certainly speaks to their power, it also hints at a potential detachment from the harsher realities of ruling a vast empire. Was all this pampering a sign of supreme comfort, or a subtle erosion of the sharp edge of imperial attention? The court bureaucracy around the emperor's sleep was extensive. Eunuchs of various ranks held specific duties, guarding the outer chambers, ensuring silence, overseeing the preparation of the bed and the room, and even waking the emperor at the precise, predetermined time. You see them moving like silent shadows through the palace after dark, their movements synchronized, their presence almost imperceptible, ensuring nothing disturbed the imperial repose. Their lives, in many ways, revolved around the rhythm of the emperor's sleep, even during the day. The Tang emperors engaged in activities that would naturally promote better sleep. They were patrons of the arts, engaging in poetry, calligraphy, and music. They enjoyed elaborate banquets, often accompanied by performances and games. While seemingly leisurely, these activities provided mental stimulation and physical activity through various forms of dance and outdoor pursuits, like hunting, that could contribute to a healthier sleep cycle than the constant, grinding anxiety of the three kingdoms. However, despite the lavish surroundings, the burden of empire still weighed heavily. Political rivalries, rebellions, and personal anxieties could easily disturb even the most luxuriously prepared sleep. You imagine an emperor, despite the silken sheets and fragrant incense, still lying awake, his mind turning over a complex state affair, or perhaps a personal sorrow. The human element, the universal struggle with a restless mind, transcended even the most magnificent imperial settings. The transition from the Thames to later dynasties would see both echoes of this luxury and a return to more austere, often more pragmatic, sleep habits. But the Tang stands as a testament to an era when imperial sleep was elevated to an art form, a sensory experience designed to reinforce the emperor's supreme status and provide a cocoon of comfort in a demanding world. You feel the softness of imagined silks, smell the faint scent of ancient perfumes, and hear the almost inaudible rustle of attendants tending to the desires of the Son of Heaven. It was a time when even the act of closing one's eyes was a statement of imperial grandeur. As the golden age of the Temps gently fades, you find yourself easing into the more introspective and intellectually vibrant period of the Song Dynasty 962-1279 CE. If Temps emperors pursued luxurious dreams, their Song counterparts often wrestled with scholarly insomnia, their sleep disturbed by the weight of philosophical contemplation, the intricacies of statecraft, and the gnawing anxiety of external threats. You sense a different kind of quiet in the palace now, less the opulent hush of indulgence, more the focused stillness of deep thought, occasionally punctuated by a sigh of intellectual weariness. You are now in Kaifeng, the northern Song capital, or later, Linan Hangzhou. For the southern Song, the palaces here, while still grand, reflect a more refined aesthetic, less ostentatious than the Tang, emphasizing elegance, scholarly pursuits, and harmonious integration with natural landscapes. The air is often filled not with exotic perfumes, but with the scent of ink and paper, the murmur of scholarly debate, and the quiet rustle of books. 4 Song emperors, many of whom were accomplished calligraphers, poets, and even painters. Intellectual engagement was paramount, and it often came at the cost of peaceful slumber. Mainstream historical fact: the Song dynasty is renowned for its explosion of Neo-Confucian philosophy. Emperors, influenced by prominent scholars like Jushi, were expected to be paragons of moral rectitude and intellectual enlightenment. This meant constant study, rigorous self-cultivation, and endless contemplation of state affairs through a philosophical lens. You picture an emperor poring over dense classical texts late into the night, his mind grappling with the intricacies of governance, ethics, and the very nature of the cosmos. This intense intellectual activity, a hallmark of the Song imperial court, often led to mental overstimulation, making it incredibly difficult to quiet the mind for sleep. It's like trying to shut down a supercomputer after it's been running complex simulations all day. It needs a cool-down period that these emperors rarely afforded themselves. The imperial bedchambers of the Song reflected this intellectual bent. While still comfortable, the emphasis shifted from sheer opulence to a more understated, scholarly elegance. You might find exquisite ink paintings on the walls, perhaps a collection of rare books stacked neatly beside the bed, or a scholar's rock strategically placed to aid contemplation. The colors might be more muted, earthy tones, promoting a sense of calm and reflection rather than vibrant grandeur. The bed itself, while still a comfortable platform, might be simpler in design, less adorned, signaling a preference for substance over show. a quirky tidbit that illustrates their scholarly preoccupation. There are anecdotes of song emperors having small personal libraries or study nooks directly within their sleeping quarters. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night, unable to sleep, and instead of counting sheep, you simply reach for a volume of Mencius or a philosophical treatise on governance. For some, the urge to resolve a complex intellectual problem or refine a poetic couplet was stronger than the desire for slumber. You can almost see the faint glow of a small lamp illuminating a face etched with thought, a quill scratching softly on paper, while the rest of the palace slept. This suggests that for some song rulers, the boundaries between work and rest, thought and sleep, were perpetually blurred. The political climate also contributed to their sleeplessness. The Song dynasty faced constant military pressure from northern nomadic groups like the Hetans, Lao dynasty, and later the Jurchens Jin dynasty. This perpetual external threat, often leading to costly military campaigns and humiliating treaties, created a pervasive undercurrent of anxiety within the court, and especially for the emperor, who bore the ultimate responsibility. You feel the heavy weight of that worry, the constant strategic calculations, the gnawing concern for the empire's security, preventing a truly peaceful mind from settling for sleep. Imperial physicians, while still employing herbal remedies, might have increasingly focused on concoctions designed to calm the mind and ease mental fatigue, rather than simply induce physical sleep. They would also emphasize dietary recommendations and perhaps light physical exercises like Tao Yin, early forms of Qigong, to improve qi flow and reduce mental agitation. The approach was more about achieving a balanced state conducive to natural sleep rather than forcing slumber. Historians still argue whether the Song emperors' deep immersion in scholarly pursuits and their often passive military strategies were intrinsically linked. Did their intellectualism distract them from practical governance, or was it a coping mechanism for the anxieties of their insecure borders? What is clear is that this intellectual intensity, combined with external pressures, often led to a form of chronic high-level anxiety that significantly impacted their ability to achieve truly restorative sleep. Their minds were always on the daily routine. For a Song emperor would have been incredibly rigorous. Early morning audiences, lengthy policy debates, the meticulous review of official documents, and continued study well into the evening would have left little time for unwinding. You imagine the emperor, exhausted but mentally stimulated, finally retiring to his chamber, only for his thoughts to continue racing, replaying debates, or contemplating philosophical dilemmas. The concept of shutting down for the night was a struggle. Even their leisure activities often involved intellectual engagement, composing poetry with court scholars, discussing art, or playing strategic board games like Go. While enjoyable, these activities still kept their minds highly active, making the transition to sleep a challenge. It's like trying to fall asleep right after winning a complex chess match. The internal dynamics of the court, while less overtly violent than the Three Kingdoms, still involved subtle power plays and factionalism. The emperor had to constantly navigate these political currents, fostering loyalty and managing dissent. This mental chess game, played out daily, added another layer of cognitive load that could bleed into their nighttime hours. You sense the delicate balance required, the constant vigilance. even when the threat was internal and insidious rather than external and obvious. The aesthetic of the song, known for its refined ceramics, delicate paintings, and profound poetry, suggests a deep appreciation for the quiet moments. Yet, paradoxically, for the emperor, these moments were often filled with internal turmoil rather than peaceful contemplation. The beauty of the palace gardens might have offered some solace, but the weight of responsibility was a constant companion. In contrast to the Qin's fear-induced wakefulness or the Tang's luxurious comfort, the song Emperor's Sleep was often characterized by a profound mental busyness. Their minds were their greatest assets, but also their greatest impediments to rest. The pursuit of wisdom, governance, and cosmic understanding left little room for the simple, unburdened slumber of a common person. As you slowly withdraw from the elegant, yet often anxious, world of the Song dynasty, you carry with you the image of an emperor not defined by martial might or grand opulence, but by the relentless churn of his intellect. His sleepless nights were not necessarily a sign of illness, but often a testament to the depth of his thought and the burden of his imperial role. It makes you reflect on the different kinds of work that can keep a person awake at night. For the Song emperors, it was often the relentless, beautiful, and ultimately exhausting work of the mind. Leaving the intellectual anxieties of the Song emperors behind, you now brace yourself for a seismic shift in imperial culture as we enter the Yuan dynasty, 1271 to 1368 CE. This was not a native Chinese dynasty, but the vast empire established by the Mongols, led by Kublai Khan. For these nomadic conquerors, the concept of a fixed, elaborate imperial palace, and indeed of sedentary sleep patterns, was fundamentally alien. Their sleep adaptations were born from a legacy of the open steppe, constant movement, and pragmatic conquest. You sense a wilder, more primal energy in the air, a stark contrast to the refined complexities of previous dynasties. You find yourself not in a sprawling, walled capital city, but perhaps in a vast, movable encampment. The very idea of a permanent imperial bedchamber seems almost quaint here. The Mongols were masters of mobility, their entire lifestyle dictated by the needs of their herds and their military campaigns. Their palace could be packed up and moved in a matter of days. This fluidity profoundly impacted their approach to sleep, emphasizing adaptability, resilience, and a deep connection to their environment. Mainstream historical fact, the most iconic symbol of the Mongol imperial lifestyle was the yurt, or gur, as it's known in Mongolian. Even for Kublai Khan, the first Yuan emperor to truly embrace Chinese governance, the gur remained central to his life and, crucially, his sleep. While he established a grand capital at Dadu, modern-day Beijing, complete with traditional Chinese-style palaces, he reportedly maintained traditional Mongolian felt tents within the palace grounds, and often preferred to sleep in these more familiar nomadic structures. You imagine a stark, circular tent, perhaps richly adorned inside with furs and embroideries, but fundamentally a portable dwelling. This blend of nomadic tradition and settled imperial life was unique to the Yuan. It's like having a camper van permanently parked in the queen's backyard, and she sometimes prefers sleeping in it. The reasons for this preference were multifaceted. For one, it was a profound connection to their roots, a rejection of what they might have seen as the effete luxuries of the conquered Chinese. For another, the Gare was incredibly practical, warm in winter, cool in summer, and easily transportable. For a leader who still had one foot in the nomadic world, even while ruling a vast agrarian empire, this adaptability was key. You picture Kublai Khan surrounded by the felt walls of his Gare, perhaps dreaming of vast steppes and thundering hooves, even as he ruled over millions of sedentary subjects. A quirky tidbit about these nomadic sleep adaptations: Mongol rulers, including the Yuan emperors, were renowned for their hardiness and ability to sleep under almost any conditions. There are accounts of them sleeping directly on the ground, wrapped in furs, even in harsh weather, or taking short naps while on horseback during long marches. This wasn't about seeking comfort, but about being constantly prepared for immediate action. Their bodies were conditioned for resilience, and sleep was a flexible tool for recovery rather than a rigid, enshrined ritual. You might complain about a slightly lumpy mattress, while these guys were perfectly content sleeping on a pile of saddles. The bed within a Gare would typically be a simple, elevated platform, often covered with layers of felt, sheepskins, and possibly a thicker mattress filled with wool. The warmth of these natural materials was crucial in the often harsh climates they traversed. Privacy was maintained by internal curtains or screens, but the overall feeling was one of communal living. Even for the emperor, a stark contrast to the isolated, heavily guarded chambers of previous Chinese dynasties. You sense a different kind of security, not from walls, but from the close proximity of loyal warriors and family. The routine around sleep was far less formalized than in prior dynasties. There were no elaborate preparations with incense burners and dozens of attending eunuchs. Instead, it was pragmatic and direct. You imagine the emperor simply retiring, perhaps after a communal meal, and laying down. The sounds of the encampment, the low murmur of voices, the crackle of a distant fire, the sounds of horses would have been their nightly lullaby. Historians still argue whether the Mongol emperor's retention of nomadic customs, including their sleep habits, ultimately hindered or helped their rule over the Chinese. While it certainly alienated some of the traditional Chinese elite, it also allowed them to maintain a distinct cultural identity and the military prowess that had brought them to power. Their resilience in sleep mirrored their resilience in conquest, but perhaps less suited them for the sedentary governance of a vast, complex society. The concept of time itself was more fluid for the Mongols. Unlike the rigid schedules of Chinese court life, nomadic life revolved around the rhythms of nature and the demands of travel and herding. This translated into a less fixed sleep schedule for the emperor. He might sleep when exhausted, wake when needed, and take short naps throughout the day as circumstances allowed. It was a biologically driven schedule rather than a ceremonially imposed one. The security of the emperor, even in his sleep, relied more on his personal guard of fierce warriors than on elaborate palace architecture. You picture these formidable men, often members of the imperial guard Keshik, standing vigil around the Gare, their presence a constant reminder of the emperor's power and the nomadic military might. The sounds of their watchful presence would have been a comforting backdrop to the emperor's slumber, even when Kublai Khan fully embraced Dadu as his capital. He was known to hunt regularly and reside in his portable palace when traveling, showing a continued preference for the nomadic way of life that included its sleep adaptations. This flexibility meant that the Yuan emperors were likely far more adaptable to varied sleeping conditions than their Chinese predecessors or successors. The Yuan dynasty was also characterized by its open-mindedness to foreign influences, bringing in advisors and ideas from across their vast empire. This meant that while their core sleep habits remained distinctly Mongolian, there might have been subtle introductions of other practices, perhaps dietary recommendations from Persian physicians or certain calming rituals from Tibetan Buddhism, influencing the edges of their sleep routines. The cultural impact of the Yuan on Chinese sleep habits was limited, however, while the emperors themselves adhered to their nomadic preferences. The vast Chinese population continued their traditional sedentary sleep patterns. Upon the fall of the Yuan and the rise of the native Ming dynasty, there would be a swift and deliberate return to traditional Chinese imperial practices, including much more formalized and luxurious sleep environments. As you conclude your journey through the Yuan dynasty, you reflect on the powerful influence of culture and origin on something as fundamental as sleep. For the Mongol emperors, sleep was not a symbol of sedentary luxury or intellectual contemplation, but a testament to rugged adaptability, a brief moment of pragmatic rest amidst a life of constant movement and conquest. It makes you think about how your own sleep habits are shaped by your environment and lifestyle, and how radically different they might be if you had to pack up your bedroom every few weeks. Slipping away from the open steppes and adaptable gares of the Yuan, you now find yourself within the imposing, almost suffocating confines of the Ming Dynasty 1368 to 1644 CE. This was a period of strong, centralized native Chinese rule, marked by an emphasis on tradition, strict protocol, and an almost obsessive concern for internal security. For the Ming emperors, sleep was no longer about nomadic adaptability or philosophical dreams. It was governed by an incredibly rigid, often isolated, schedule dictated by court ritual and the impenetrable walls of the Forbidden City. You immediately sense a palpable shift in the atmosphere, a heightened formality, an air of constant surveillance, and a pervasive sense of being perpetually observed. Even in slumber, you are now standing within the sprawling labyrinth of the Forbidden City. In Beijing, its formidable red walls and golden roofs proclaiming absolute imperial authority. This was not just a palace, it was a self-contained world, a fortress designed to both protect and isolate the Son of Heaven. The Ming emperors, having overthrown the Mongol Yuan, were acutely focused on re-establishing traditional Chinese governance. This meant a meticulous return to elaborate court rituals, and the emperor's daily and nightly life became a highly choreographed performance. Mainstream historical fact. Ming emperors lived under an incredibly strict daily schedule, meticulously planned and enforced by the powerful directorate of palace eunuchs. This included a precise bedtime and wake-up time, often dictated by the hour. Regardless of the emperor's personal inclination or fatigue, you imagine the emperor, perhaps deeply engrossed in a document, or simply not feeling sleepy, being gently but firmly guided towards his bedchamber as the designated hour approached. This wasn't merely a suggestion, it was an unbreakable protocol. This rigid adherence to schedule was believed to bring order and harmony to the empire, mirroring the cosmic order, and any deviation could be seen as a disruption. It's like living on military time, but with far higher stakes and no weekend passes. The imperial bedchambers in the Forbidden City were designed for security, privacy, and solemn grandeur rather than overt opulence. While luxurious by common standards, they lacked the unbridled sensory indulgence of the Temps. Instead, you'd find sturdy, ornate wooden beds, often lacquered and carved with auspicious symbols, but always positioned in accordance with strict geomantic principles, feng shui, to ensure positive qi flow and ward off malevolent influences. The bedding would be of high quality, silk and cotton, but perhaps less overtly decadent. The emphasis was on a sense of dignified, calm, and impenetrable security, a quirky tidbit that underscores their isolation. Ming emperors, especially later ones, often chose to sleep in different, seemingly random, chambers within the Forbidden City each night, much like Qin Shi Huang, but for slightly different reasons. While the Qin emperor was driven by paranoia of assassins for the Ming, it was also a way to prevent concubines or factions from gaining undue influence by having constant access to the emperor's person. It was a strategy of controlled unpredictability. You picture the network of eunuchs silently preparing various chambers, ensuring no one, not even the highest-ranking concubine, could predict the emperor's exact sleeping location on any given night. This constant shifting, while perhaps offering some security, must have been profoundly isolating and disruptive to truly deep, consistent sleep. Imagine never quite knowing which bed you'd be in, or if you'd be in the same room twice in a week. The strict internal security of the Forbidden City meant that the emperor's sleep was guarded by layers of eunuchs and imperial guards, far beyond the single watchful attendant of earlier eras. You sense the hushed atmosphere after dark, the disciplined patrols, the stringent rules against noise or disturbance. Every door was locked, every corridor monitored. The emperor's sleep was literally encased within a fortress, protected by a silent, ever-vigilant human wall. Historians still argue whether the extreme isolation and rigid protocols of the Ming emperors contributed to their increasing detachment from the realities of the empire, particularly in the later stages of the dynasty. While the structure was designed to protect and empower, it often created an environment where emperors became secluded, relying heavily on eunuchs and court factions for information, which could lead to skewed perceptions and ultimately poor governance. Their controlled sleep environment, ironically, might have contributed to a form of waking slumber, where they were insulated from truth. The Ming dynasty was also marked by a resurgence of elaborate ancestral worship and Confucian rituals. Before retiring, an emperor might engage in private prayers or contemplative rituals, seeking guidance from his ancestors and ensuring his actions aligned with heavenly principles. This mental preparation while spiritually significant, could also keep the mind active, making the transition to sleep less straightforward. Sleep problems, when they occurred, were treated with a blend of traditional Chinese medicine and careful consideration of imperial protocol. Physicians would prescribe specific herbal remedies, focusing on calming the spirit Shen and nourishing the vital essence Jing, but always within the bounds of what was deemed appropriate for the Son of Heaven. Extreme measures or publicly known sleep issues were avoided, as they could imply weakness or a disruption in the emperor's cosmic connection. The role of eunuchs in the emperor's sleep was magnified during the Ming. They controlled access to the emperor's bedchamber, managed the strict daily schedules, and were often the only individuals allowed near the emperor in his most private moments. Their power, especially in controlling who was summoned to the emperor's bed, was immense, shaping not only imperial succession, but also the emperor's personal life and, by extension, his sleep environment. You see their silent, efficient movements, their watchful eyes, their omnipresence. Even the process of waking the emperor was highly ritualized. There was no jarring alarm clock or loud servant. Instead, a subtle, gradual process of increasing light or gentle sounds. Perhaps the distant strike of a palace gong would slowly rouse the emperor, ensuring a smooth transition from the state of yin night to yang day. This was designed to respect the emperor's dignity and ensure he awoke in a calm, clear state, ready to face the demands of his reign. The extreme focus on maintaining order and tradition meant that deviation from established norms was rare. This applied even to dreams. While dream interpretation still existed, it was perhaps less about spontaneous divine messages, as in the Han, and more about confirming auspicious omens or interpreting them within a Confucian framework of moral guidance. Any nightmares or unsettling dreams might be quickly dismissed or reinterpreted to avoid suggesting imperial failings. The imperial lifestyle, despite its outward grandeur, was incredibly solitary. The emperor, even surrounded by thousands, was fundamentally alone. This isolation, combined with the immense burden of ruling and the strict protocols, likely made true, deep relaxation for sleep a constant challenge. You sense the loneliness that must have permeated these silent chambers, the weight of an empire resting on one, often tired, mind. As you step away from the rigid, meticulously controlled world of the Ming Forbidden City, you appreciate the profound impact of institutionalization on something as personal as sleep. For these emperors, rest was less a personal choice and more a function of state, a vital component of a carefully managed imperial machine. Their sleep was both protected and constrained, a silent testament to the power and isolation of the Son of Heaven, perpetually enclosed within walls, both physical and ritualistic. Shifting from the strict, internalized routines of the Ming, you now move into the final great imperial era, the Qing dynasty, 1644 to 1912 CE. This was another foreign-led dynasty, founded by the Manchus, who, like the Mongols before them, brought their own cultural sensibilities to the imperial court. While they adopted many Chinese traditions, including the grandeur of the Forbidden City, their approach to sleep carried distinct Manchu influences, particularly in their reverence for auspicious locations and the subtle integration of their shamanistic heritage. You sense a blend of solemn formality and a quieter, almost mystical attention to the unseen forces that shaped the imperial resting place. You find yourself again within the vast complexes of the Forbidden City, now under Manchu rule. The architecture and fundamental layout remain the same, echoing the Ming's emphasis on order and control. However, subtle changes in decor, a slightly different emphasis on certain rituals, and the continued integration of Manchu language and customs pervade the air. For the Qing emperors, the imperial bedchamber was not just a place for rest, but a sacred space whose auspicious alignment and spiritual purity were paramount, believed to directly influence the health, fertility, and longevity of the Son of Heaven and, by extension, the empire. Mainstream historical fact: the Qing emperors placed immense importance on geomancy, or feng shui, when it came to their living and sleeping quarters. This was a mainstream practice rooted deeply in Chinese tradition, but the Manchus, with their own animistic and shamanistic leanings, embraced it with particular fervor, believing that the correct placement of objects and structures could harness positive cosmic energy ki and ward off negative influences. You envision court geomancers, highly respected figures, meticulously advising the emperor on the precise orientation of his bed, the placement of furniture, and even the type of materials used in his bedchamber. A slight misalignment could reportedly lead to illness, misfortune, or even a challenge to the emperor's mandate of heaven. This wasn't interior decorating, it was cosmic engineering. The imperial bed itself often featured prominently in these geomantic considerations. You might see a large, carved wooden bed, perhaps enclosed by a warm, private canopy, a Kong bed, or platform bed, sometimes with heating from below in the north, designed not just for comfort, but for optimal ki flow. The exact positioning, relative to doors, windows, and even the direction of mountains or waterways visible from the palace would be painstakingly determined. Imagine having your entire room rearranged because a geomancer detected an inauspicious energy flow from the northwest. It speaks volumes about their deep-seated beliefs in the interconnectedness of their personal well-being and the cosmic order, a quirky tidbit that reveals the depth of their superstition. Qing emperors would sometimes use specific types of wood, or even place certain objects under their beds, not for comfort, but for their perceived auspicious properties. For example, specific types of jade, believed to absorb negative energy or promote longevity, might be placed near the sleeping area, or certain plants known for their protective qualities might be situated just outside the window. These weren't just decorative elements. They were active components of the emperor's spiritual defense system, silent guardians meant to ensure peaceful, protected sleep. You can almost feel the weight of these invisible forces, constantly being managed and appeased to ensure the emperor's nocturnal safety. The emperor's personal safety was still paramount, and while the shifting of rooms was less frequent than in the Ming, the security within the chosen chamber was incredibly tight. Eunuchs would still control access, and loyal guards would maintain silent vigil outside. However, the Qing also incorporated elements of their Manchu heritage into security. You might find a Manchu guard, rather than just a Han one, in immediate proximity to the emperor's chamber, bringing a different cultural layer to the imperial watch. Historians still argue whether the Qing emperor's reliance on geomancy and other Superstitious practices was a genuine belief system or a deliberate strategy to reinforce their legitimacy by aligning themselves with ancient Chinese traditions. It was likely a blend of both, a pragmatic adoption of local customs intertwined with their own inherent spiritual leanings. What is undeniable is that these beliefs significantly shaped the physical environment and the rituals surrounding imperial sleep. The elaborate ceremony of the emperors going to bed or entering the chamber was still a highly ritualized event, though perhaps with a subtle Manchu flavor. Rather than being ordered to bed, the emperor would retire at a dignified pace. The chosen concubine of the night, if any, would be brought to the emperor's chamber, often wrapped in a blanket, carried by eunuchs to ensure modesty and prevent any illicit activities. Her entry would be meticulously recorded, and she would then retreat before dawn, never allowed to linger unsupervised. This rigorous protocol ensured that even intimate moments were under strict imperial control, affecting the nature of the emperor's sleep with a concubine present. Imperial physicians continued to play a crucial role, but their practice might have incorporated Manchu medical traditions alongside the Chinese. Their prescriptions for sleep would consider both the physical humors and the energetic balance of the emperor's body, often focusing on tonics to strengthen the qi and blood, believed to be essential for deep, restorative sleep. They also often consulted on the auspicious timing for certain treatments or dietary changes related to sleep, integrating the geomantic beliefs into their medical advice. The Qing emperors, particularly early strong rulers like Kangxi and Qianlong, were known for their diligence and administrative capacity. Despite the elaborate rituals, they were often tireless workers, rising early and working late. This demanding schedule, while crucial for governance, meant that sleep was precious and had to be highly efficient. You imagine an emperor who, despite the surrounding superstitions and elaborate protocols, focused intensely on making his limited sleep as restorative as possible, recognizing its importance for maintaining his sharp mind. The court was a delicate balance of Manchu and Han influences, and this extended even to the language spoken and the customs observed within the palace. The emperor might address his closest attendants in Manchu, even as he conducted official business in Chinese. This cultural duality subtly permeated the atmosphere of the imperial bedchamber, adding another layer to the complex tapestry of their nightly lives. Even the dreams of the Qing emperors, while still potentially interpreted for meaning, might have been viewed through a slightly different cultural lens, perhaps incorporating elements of Manchu shamanistic cosmology, where animal spirits or natural phenomena held specific, potent meanings. The interpretations would be less about Confucian morality and more about auspicious omens or warnings from the spirit world. As you conclude your journey through the final dynasty, the Qing, you are left with an image of imperial sleep that is both grand and deeply rooted in a complex web of spiritual beliefs. For these emperors, their sleep was not just a personal respite, but a meticulously managed, cosmically aligned state, intimately connected to the destiny of their empire. The subtle hum of auspicious energies, the quiet vigil of loyal guards, and the strict adherence to unseen forces all contributed to a unique form of imperial slumber, where even the position of a bed could decide the fate of a dynasty. Stepping back from the Qing emperor's auspicious slumber, You now turn your attention to a group of individuals whose lives were utterly intertwined with the imperial bedtime, yet whose presence was often silent and unseen. The eunuchs, these castrated male servants, held immense power, not through martial might or intellectual prowess, but through their unparalleled proximity to the emperor, especially in the most private of spaces, the bedchamber. For the emperors, eunuchs were indispensable. For the eunuchs, managing imperial sleep was a path to influence, wealth, and sometimes ruin. You sense the delicate balance of power, the silent machinations, and the profound intimacy that defined their role. Imagine yourself as a eunuch within the forbidden city, your movements precise, your face impassive, your life, from the moment of your castration to your last breath, is dedicated to the imperial household. Within this intricate hierarchy, those assigned to the inner court, especially the Directorate of Palace Eunuchs, wielded incredible influence. Their duties spanned everything from managing daily logistics to delivering confidential messages, but their most crucial and delicate responsibility often revolved around the emperor's personal life, particularly his sleep. Mainstream historical fact: eunuchs were solely responsible for managing access to the emperor's bedchamber, preparing the room, and even selecting which concubine would share the imperial bed on a given night. This power was formally recognized through a system where eunuchs would present a tray of inscribed jade or silver tablets, each bearing the name of a concubine. The emperor would then turn down the tablet of his chosen companion for the night. You visualize this ritual, the quiet presentation, the emperor's silent choice, and the eunuch's meticulous execution. It wasn't merely a matter of serving, it was controlling information, access, and ultimately lineage. Imagine having to prepare the most powerful man in the world for bed, knowing your slightest error could cost you your life, or, if done well, elevate your status. The eunuch's role began long before the emperor even considered sleep. They would oversee the meticulous cleaning and preparation of the imperial bedchamber, ensuring every surface was spotless, every curtain hung perfectly. They would manage the lighting, whether it was dimming oil lamps or adjusting the wicks of candles. They were also responsible for the subtle details, placing a warming brazier in winter, setting out cooling basins in summer, or ensuring the air was purified with specific incenses chosen for their calming properties. You can almost smell the faint, lingering scent of carefully burned agar wood or sandalwood, knowing that every detail was a eunuch's silent effort. A quirky tidbit about their intimate knowledge: eunuchs, due to their constant presence and intimate knowledge of the emperor's habits, often became unofficial experts on his moods, health, and sleep patterns. They would observe subtle cues, a slight frown, a shift in breathing, a restless turn, and adapt their service accordingly. Some eunuchs became so attuned to the emperor that they could anticipate his needs even before he expressed them, knowing just when to offer a warm drink, adjust a pillow, or simply retreat to allow undisturbed quiet. This unparalleled intimacy, bordering on clairvoyance, made them invaluable, yet also dangerous, as they held immense leverage over the emperor's most vulnerable state. Imagine having someone know your sleep quirks better than you do, simply by observing you night after night. Their responsibility extended to the very moment the emperor retired. They would assist him in changing into his sleeping robes, often made of fine, light silk. They would ensure that any official documents or personal effects were neatly put away, and that the chamber was free from anything that might cause disturbance or suspicion. The emperor's dignity and privacy, even during these vulnerable moments, were paramount, and the eunuchs were the silent custodians of this sacred space. Historians still argue whether the immense power wielded by eunuchs, particularly during the Ming dynasty, ultimately corrupted the imperial court and contributed to dynastic decline. While their practical skills and loyalty to the emperor could be invaluable, their lack of a direct lineage often meant their primary loyalty was to their own faction or personal gain, leading to widespread corruption and interference in state affairs. Their control over the emperor's sleep, including access to his bed, was a potent symbol of this dangerous power. The eunuchs also served as the emperor's primary alarm clock. There were no mechanical clocks in the modern sense. Instead, the eunuchs relied on various methods to gently rouse the emperor at the precise hour dictated by his rigorous schedule. This could involve slowly increasing the light in the chamber, making subtle, non-disruptive sounds from an outer room, or even gently whispering. The aim was to ensure the emperor awoke, refreshed and composed, ready to face the demanding day, without any jarring or disrespectful disturbance beyond the physical duties. Eunuchs often acted as confidants, listeners, and even unofficial advisors. The emperor, isolated by his supreme position, might sometimes confide his anxieties, frustrations, or even his dreams to a trusted eunuch, knowing that these individuals, being castrated, could not pose a direct threat to his lineage or political power. This psychological intimacy, especially during the quiet hours around sleep, further solidified their unique position in the imperial court. However, this proximity came at a cost for the eunuchs. Their lives were fraught with danger. A misstep, a perceived slight, or falling out of favor could lead to brutal punishment, torture, or even death. You feel the constant tension, the need for absolute perfection in their service, the fear of imperial displeasure hanging over every movement and decision. This pressure, too, meant that their own sleep was likely light and disturbed, always ready to respond to the emperor's call. The eunuchs also managed the immense logistics of the Forbidden City after dark. They were responsible for ensuring silence throughout the inner palace, enforcing curfews, and conducting regular patrols to maintain security. The vast network of eunuch staff meant that practically nothing happened within the imperial living quarters without their knowledge or approval, extending their control even to the sounds and movements that might affect the emperor's rest. The legacy of the eunuchs is complex and often contradictory. They were both servants and masters, humble attendants, and powerful political players. Their intimate involvement in the emperor's sleep routines highlights not just their practical utility, but also the profound psychological and social dynamics of the imperial court. Their very existence was predicated on their ability to navigate the emperor's most private moments, making them indispensable, yet forever outsiders. As you conclude your observation of the eunuchs, you are left with a deeper understanding of the hidden currents of power and control that flowed through the imperial bedchamber, their silent service, their meticulous planning, and their unique proximity shaped not only the quality of the emperor's sleep, but also, in many ways, the very course of Chinese history. They were the invisible architects of imperial rest, the quiet guardians of the most vulnerable moments of the Son of Heaven. Having observed the silent, influential role of the eunuchs, your focus now shifts to another crucial group whose presence intimately shaped the emperor's knights, the concubines. More than just companions, these women, often numbering in the thousands within the larger palace complexes, existed in a complex hierarchy. Their lives defined by proximity to imperial power and the ultimate goal of bearing a male heir. Their presence in the imperial bedchamber was not merely personal, it was a matter of state, deeply intertwined with the emperor's sleep, his progeny, and the stability of the dynasty. You sense the intense rivalries, the quiet hopes, and the profound vulnerability that defined their nocturnal existence. You are now immersed in the bustling, yet rigidly structured world of the imperial harem, a back palace filled with thousands of women, ranging from empresses and consorts down to the lowest-ranking ladies-in-waiting. Each woman's ultimate aspiration, and often her family's strategic goal, was to catch the emperor's eye, gain his favor, and, most importantly, conceive a child, particularly a son. This immense pressure colored every aspect of their lives, including their interactions with the emperor in the most private of settings. Mainstream historical fact: the selection of which concubine would share the emperor's bed on any given night was a highly formalized and bureaucratic process, often managed by the eunuchs, as we just discussed. This wasn't a spontaneous choice based on romantic whim. The emperor would often review a list or set of tablets, and once his choice was made, the selected concubine would be prepared. You picture her being bathed, perfumed, and then, in many dynasties, she would be stripped naked, wrapped in a large silk quilt or blanket, and carried by eunuchs to the emperor's bedchamber. This ritual, designed to prevent any hidden weapons or illicit conversations, highlights the emperor's constant vulnerability and the strict control over his intimate moments. Imagine the anxiety for the concubine, the combination of hope, fear, and profound public scrutiny on what was ostensibly a private encounter. Once delivered to the imperial bed, the concubine's role was often multifaceted. Beyond procreation, she was expected to provide companionship, listen to the emperor's musings, and contribute to his comfort and relaxation. Her demeanor would be one of quiet deference, aiming to soothe and please. You envision her, carefully, attentive to the emperor's needs, perhaps offering a gentle massage, serving a calming tea, or simply being a silent, comforting presence. Her ability to facilitate the emperor's restful sleep was crucial, as a well-rested emperor was generally a more agreeable one, a quirky tidbit that illuminates the rituals. In some dynasties, after the intimate encounter, the concubine was not allowed to simply stay the night. Instead, she would be removed from the emperor's bedchamber by eunuchs shortly after dawn, sometimes even earlier, to prevent her from lingering and potentially influencing the emperor while he was still drowsy or vulnerable. Her departure would be just as formal as her arrival, emphasizing that her presence was for specific imperial purposes, not casual companionship. You imagine the concubine, perhaps still half asleep, being quietly lifted and carried away, the brief moment of imperial favor ending abruptly with the sunrise. It's a stark reminder that even in bed, these were political transactions, not purely personal ones. The sheer number of concubines within the Forbidden City meant intense competition. Each woman lived in anticipation, vying for the emperor's infrequent attention. This constant pressure, the hope of favor, and the fear of being forgotten, undoubtedly caused immense stress. You sense the quiet desperation, the scheming, and the alliances formed and broken within the harem, all centered around the ultimate prize, the emperor's bed, and the potential for a son. This environment of ambition and insecurity often meant that their own sleep would be restless and filled with anxieties, reflecting the precariousness of their existence. Historians still argue whether the system of numerous concubines truly ensured imperial succession, or if it often led to more intense factionalism and infighting within the palace, ultimately destabilizing the court. While the intention was to guarantee many potential heirs, the human element of jealousy, ambition, and power struggles often turned the back palace into a political battlefield, the echoes of which could easily disturb the emperor's peace. The imperial physicians also played a role in the concubines' interaction with the emperor. They would sometimes be consulted to determine a concubine's health or fertility, and even to prescribe remedies or tonics that might enhance her chances of conceiving. Their medical advice could influence which concubines were presented to the emperor, further intertwining medicine, sleep, and imperial lineage. The emperor's personal preferences, despite the rigid system, sometimes played a role. A favored concubine might be summoned more frequently, or allowed to remain longer in the chamber. However, even these instances were often noted and scrutinized by eunuchs and other court officials, highlighting the lack of genuine privacy in the imperial bedroom. The emperor might crave genuine intimacy, but even that was filtered through layers of protocol and surveillance. The concubines' daily lives were also heavily managed, designed to keep them healthy and available for imperial summoning. They would often engage in various leisurely pursuits, embroidery, music, reading, garden strolls, to maintain their composure and beauty. Their sleep, when they were not with the emperor, would typically be in their own, less lavish chambers. Within the harem, these quarters, while comfortable by external standards, could feel like gilded cages, filled with the collective tension of hundreds of women awaiting their turn. The atmosphere in the emperor's bedchamber, when a concubine was present, would be one of hushed expectation. Loud noises, sudden movements, or overt emotional displays were strictly forbidden. The goal was to provide a calming, supportive environment for the emperor, ensuring his comfort and promoting restful sleep, even amidst the underlying purpose of procreation for the emperor himself. The presence of different concubines could offer a degree of variety, perhaps preventing boredom, but it also meant a constant rotation of personalities and energies in his most intimate space. This rotational system, while pragmatic for ensuring heirs and distributing favor, might have prevented the emperor from forming deep, consistent bonds that could contribute to truly profound and trusting sleep. As you reflect on the role of concubines, you realize that their lives and their interactions with the emperor's sleep were a microcosm of the entire imperial system, deeply hierarchical, meticulously controlled, and driven by the relentless pursuit of power and continuity. Their presence in the imperial bedchamber was a testament to the fact that even the most personal aspects of an emperor's life were irrevocably linked to the fate of the dynasty. Their silent, strategic roles in the emperor's night remind you that sleep, for these rulers, was rarely a simple, solitary act, but a complex tapestry woven with threads of politics, power, and human vulnerability. Having explored the intimate, yet controlled, roles of eunuchs and concubines in shaping the emperor's sleep, you now turn to the critical figures responsible for the emperor's health, both waking and sleeping, the imperial physicians. These highly skilled practitioners, blending observation, ancient wisdom, and empirical knowledge, were tasked with ensuring the Son of Heaven's well-being, which inherently included his ability to achieve restorative sleep. Their approach was holistic, their remedies often arcane, and their careers and lives frequently hinged on the quality of the emperor's rest. You sense the immense pressure they operated under, where a single sleepless night for the emperor could trigger a chain reaction of anxiety and suspicion directed squarely at them. You are now in the Imperial Medical Academy, or within the emperor's private consultation chambers, inhaling the faint, complex aroma of dried herbs and medicinal concoctions. For centuries, Chinese medicine had developed a sophisticated understanding of the body's internal balance, the flow of key vital energy, and the harmony of yin and yang. Sleeplessness, or bushi, shu man, was not seen as a singular ailment, but a symptom of deeper imbalances within the body's organs or energy pathways. This holistic view meant that imperial physicians didn't just prescribe a sleeping draft. They aimed to restore fundamental harmony. Mainstream historical fact: imperial physicians were often drawn from the most brilliant minds of their generation, educated in the classical medical texts and trained in diagnosis through pulse taking, tongue observation, and detailed questioning. When an emperor suffered from insomnia or restless sleep, their first task was to conduct a thorough diagnostic assessment, far more comprehensive than a modern sleep study. They would meticulously observe the emperor's daily routine, diet, emotional state, and even the characteristics of his dreams, seeking clues to the underlying imbalance. You imagine a physician, head bowed respectfully, taking the emperor's pulse for what seems like an eternity, discerning subtle rhythms and the regularities that would guide his treatment. Their ability to subtly glean information about the emperor's private life without being intrusive was an art form in itself. Once a diagnosis was made, the treatment for imperial sleep issues was often a complex regimen of herbal remedies. These weren't simple, over-the-counter pills. They were intricate formulations, sometimes involving dozens of different ingredients, each carefully selected for its specific properties. Common ingredients might include jujube seeds, swanzhao ren for calming the spirit, poria mushroom fuling for strengthening the spleen and calming the heart, or various forms of ginseng ren shen to invigorate qi and soothe anxiety. You can almost taste the bitter, earthy concoctions, brewed with immense care, steeped for precise durations, and served at specific temperatures. A quirky tidbit that showcases the creativity and sometimes desperation of imperial medicine. Beyond standard herbal remedies, some imperial physicians experimented with truly bizarre treatments for sleep disorders. There are historical accounts, though sometimes bordering on legend, of emperors being advised to sleep with specific objects under their beds or pillows, such as jade stones believed to absorb negative energy, or even small, live animals like a quiet cricket in a cage whose presence was thought to ward off malevolent spirits or provide a calming, natural sound. Imagine being prescribed a cricket as a sleep aid. While these practices might seem outlandish to us, they reflect a deep belief in the subtle energetic interactions between the body and its environment. The pressure on these physicians was immense. If an emperor continued to suffer from insomnia, it could lead to irritability, poor decision-making, and even perceived weakness, all of which reflected poorly on the medical team. Failure to restore the emperor's sleep could mean disgrace, exile, or even execution. You feel the constant, invisible knife hanging over their heads, driving them to innovate, to observe, and to perform at their absolute best. This pressure cooker environment likely pushed the boundaries of medical knowledge and practice. Historians still argue whether the efficacy of these ancient herbal remedies was primarily pharmacological or psychotherapeutic. Was it the chemical properties of the herbs that induced sleep, or was it the elaborate ritual, the emperor's faith in his physicians, and the powerful suggestion that he would sleep that truly made the difference? It's likely a combination of both, a testament to the mind-body connection that was a cornerstone of traditional Chinese medicine. Beyond concoctions, imperial physicians also advised on lifestyle adjustments. They might recommend specific diets, avoiding certain stimulating foods or drinks in the evening. They could prescribe light physical exercises like Dao Yin, early forms of Qigong, or controlled breathing techniques to regulate qi flow and calm the nervous system before bedtime. They might also suggest specific bathing rituals using infused waters to promote relaxation. Their holistic approach meant they considered every aspect of the emperor's day that could impact his night. The emperor's dreams themselves were often a diagnostic tool for the physicians. Troubled dreams, vivid nightmares, or recurrent symbolic imagery could indicate internal imbalances, too much heat, stagnant qi, or a disturbed spirit. The physician would analyze these dream narratives, often in consultation with dream interpreters, to refine their diagnosis and adjust their treatment plan. This made the emperor's nocturnal experiences a direct window into his physical and mental state. The relationship between the imperial physician and the emperor was unique. While subservient, the physician also held a position of immense trust, often knowing details of the emperor's health that no one else did. This privileged access, combined with the emperor's vulnerability during illness or sleeplessness, meant that the physician could, at times, exert subtle influence over the emperor's routines and decisions. The selection and training of imperial physicians were rigorous. They often came from families with generations of medical knowledge, or were scholars who dedicated their lives to the study of healing arts. Their education emphasized not just memorization of texts, but also meticulous observation, critical thinking, and the ability to adapt treatments to individual patients, especially one as unique and powerful as the emperor. As you conclude your exploration of the imperial physicians, you recognize their profound impact on the daily lives, and particularly the nights of the Chinese emperors. They were more than just doctors. They were holistic healers, spiritual guides, and crucial advisors, whose expertise in the delicate balance of the human body and mind was essential for maintaining the emperor's rest, health, and ultimately the stability of the empire. There Elaborate remedies, and sometimes quirky interventions, stand as a testament to humanity's enduring quest for elusive, peaceful slumber, especially when the fate of millions rests on a good night's rest. Having explored the specific individuals who shaped the emperor's sleep, you now step back to observe the broader tapestry of nocturnal palace life. After the emperor retired, the Forbidden City, or any imperial palace, didn't simply go silent. It transformed into a different kind of bustling entity, a realm of hushed activity, constant vigilance, and unseen duties, all meticulously orchestrated to ensure the emperor's undisturbed repose and the seamless continuation of imperial governance. You sense a profound duality, outward stillness masking intense, disciplined movement. Imagine the palace grounds after sunset, the grand halls, vibrant with courtly activity during the day, now stand in subdued light, vast and echoing. The main gates are sealed, and the layers of inner gates are secured. But within the residential compounds, particularly around the emperor's private quarters, life continues, albeit at a different rhythm. The sounds you hear are muted, the soft padding of slippered feet on stone, the distant clang of a sentry's armor, the gentle rustle of a robe, or the faint, almost imperceptible whisper of conversation from a shadowed courtyard. Mainstream historical fact. Security was paramount. The Forbidden City, especially during the Ming and Qing dynasties, was a fortress within a fortress. After dark, layers of gates were locked, patrol routes intensified, and access was severely restricted. Imperial guards, chosen for their loyalty and discipline, conducted regular, silent patrols. These patrols followed precise routes and timings, designed to deter intruders and detect any anomaly without creating undue noise that might disturb the emperor. You envision these disciplined soldiers moving like silent specters, their eyes constantly scanning, their ears attuned to the slightest deviation from the expected quiet. Their synchronized movements were a constant, living shield around the sleeping son of heaven. The eunuchs, as previously discussed, were at the heart of this nocturnal administration. They were the eyes and ears of the inner palace after dark. Different departments of eunuchs had specific night duties. Some managed the palace lighting, ensuring lamps were replenished and extinguished at appropriate times, guiding the way for necessary movements without bathing the emperor's quarters in too much light. Others oversaw the preparation of morning meals, working through the night in the imperial kitchens. Still others managed the imperial archives, preparing documents for the emperor's morning review. You sense their tireless dedication, their lives defined by the rhythms of the emperor's waking and sleeping hours. A quirky tidbit about this nocturnal vigilance. In some dynasties, particularly the Ming and Qing, there were specific regulations regarding the sounds permitted within a certain radius of the emperor's bedchamber. Even the chirping of crickets or the hoot of an owl might be deemed too disruptive. As such, eunuchs or gardeners might be tasked with subtly managing the natural sounds around the imperial quarters, perhaps relocating noisy insects or using subtle methods to deter birds. Imagine being paid to ensure that even nature didn't dare disturb the emperor's sleep. It speaks to the extreme lengths taken to create an environment of absolute tranquility. The concubines, too, had their own nocturnal routines. While one might be with the emperor, Hundreds of others resided in their various palaces within the harem, their nights often spent in anticipation, quiet pursuits, or sometimes restless sleep plagued by anxiety and ambition. You imagine them quietly reading, practicing music, or perhaps engaging in hushed conversations with their personal maids, all while listening for any sign of imperial summons or the quiet movements of the eunuchs. Their nights were often a solitary vigil, a waiting game. Historians still argue whether the extreme security and isolation of the imperial palace, particularly during the later dynasties, fostered an environment of heightened paranoia within the court, or if it was a necessary measure to protect the emperor from legitimate threats. While it certainly provided physical safety, it also created psychological barriers, isolating the emperor from outside information and often leaving him reliant on the filtered intelligence provided by his close attendants, who were the sole witnesses to his nocturnal world beyond the immediate vicinity of the emperor's bedchamber. Other vital palace functions continued. Imperial physicians might be on call, ready to be summoned at a moment's notice should the emperor fall ill or suffer from particularly vivid nightmares. Scribes might be working in the imperial archives, preparing official documents. Even in the outer administrative offices, some lower-ranking officials might be working late into the night, racing to complete tasks before the morning audience. The machinery of empire never truly stopped, even when its ultimate head was at rest. The palace's culinary staff also worked through the night, preparing the emperor's first meal of the day, which would often be served very early. You imagine the subtle sounds and aromas emanating from distant kitchens, a carefully orchestrated ballet of food preparation, ensuring that the Son of Heaven would awake to a fresh, nutritious meal, regardless of the hour. The absence of artificial bright lighting beyond oil lamps and candles meant that the palace was truly dark, illuminated only by the moon, stars, and carefully placed lanterns. This natural darkness, combined with the extreme quiet, would have created a uniquely immersive sensory experience, very different from our perpetually lit modern cities. You feel the deep quiet, the profound stillness that settled over the vast palace complex, broken only by the sounds of disciplined human activity. The changing of guards, a crucial part of security, was executed with meticulous precision and minimal noise. You might hear the distant, muffled sound of footsteps, a brief, whispered exchange, but never anything that would carry to the emperor's chambers. It was a testament to the discipline and training of the imperial forces. The nocturnal life within the palace also included specific rituals for auspiciousness. Some chambers might have small altars where incense would be burned, or offerings made at certain hours of the night to benevolent deities, ensuring protection and good fortune for the emperor as he slept. These subtle spiritual activities added another layer to the unseen fabric of palace nights. The atmosphere during the emperor's sleep was one of collective responsibility. Every eunuch, every guard, every concubine, and every servant knew that. Their primary duty, even in the darkest hours, was to ensure the emperor's rest was undisturbed. A loud noise, an unapproved movement, or a breach of security could have severe consequences for everyone involved. This shared burden created a uniquely disciplined and hushed environment throughout the imperial complex. As you conclude your Observation of nocturnal palace life. You are left with a profound appreciation for the intricate ecosystem that enabled the emperor to sleep. It was not just a bedchamber. It was a carefully controlled environment, populated by silent servants, vigilant guards, and a network of unseen activity, all operating in perfect synchronization to protect the sanctity of imperial slumber. The quiet of the palace at night was not emptiness, but a symphony of meticulous service and constant vigilance, a living testament to the power and isolation of the Son of Heaven, even in his dreams. Having witnessed the intricate choreography of nocturnal palace life, your journey now leads you to explore a deeper, more philosophical connection, the relationship between sleep, imperial power, and the mandate of heaven for Chinese emperors. The quality of their rest was not merely a personal matter. It was often interpreted as a direct reflection of their cosmic legitimacy, a tangible sign of heaven's approval or displeasure. A well-rested emperor was seen as a virtuous and effective ruler, while chronic insomnia or disturbed sleep could signal divine disapproval and, potentially, the impending loss of his mandate to rule. You sense the immense spiritual weight attached to every wink and every snore. You stand in the symbolic heart of the imperial palace, perhaps the hall of supreme harmony, where the emperor conducted grand ceremonies. The very air here seems to vibrate with the concept of the mandate of heaven, Tianming, the foundational political and spiritual doctrine of classical Chinese thought. This wasn't just a claim to power, it was a divine contract. Heaven bestowed its mandate upon a virtuous ruler, and if that ruler became tyrannical, corrupt, or incompetent, heaven would withdraw its favor, often signaling this withdrawal through natural disasters, rebellions, or, significantly, the emperor's declining health and well-being, including his ability to achieve proper rest. Mainstream historical fact: emperors, particularly during times of crisis or natural calamity, would often engage in and even public acts of contrition, seeking to understand where they might have erred to displease heaven. A prolonged period of the emperor's poor sleep, especially if accompanied by other ill omens, could be interpreted by court officials and the populace alike as a sign of heaven's dissatisfaction. You picture an emperor troubled by restless nights, consulting his diviners and officials, not just for medical remedies, but for explanations rooted in his moral conduct or the state of the empire. The burden of this cosmic connection was immense. His personal health was inextricable from his political legitimacy. It was like having a giant celestial sleep tracker constantly monitoring your spiritual alignment. The ability of an emperor to sleep soundly was therefore a powerful symbol of his internal harmony and his virtuous rule. A serene, untroubled sleep suggested a clear conscience, a mind at peace with its decisions, and a body balanced with cosmic forces. Conversely, chronic insomnia, nightmares, or agitated sleep could be seen as symptoms of internal disquiet, moral failing, or a disturbed spirit, potentially indicating a rupture in the sacred bond between heaven and its Son. You feel the psychological pressure this would exert, not just to get sleep, but to perform sleep, to project an image of effortless, divinely sanctioned repose. A quirky tidbit that highlights this symbolic weight: there are historical anecdotes of court officials subtly observing the emperor's demeanor after he awoke, looking for signs of a good night's rest or a troubled one. A cheerful, energetic emperor suggested a tranquil sleep and a strong mandate. A fatigued, irritable emperor, however, could spark whispered concerns among the inner court about his personal virtue or the state of the empire. Imagine waking up and immediately having dozens of pairs of eyes assessing your sleep quality, knowing their interpretation could affect policy or public morale. This hyper-awareness of the emperor's post-sleep state underscored the deep lens connection between his private well-being and his public legitimacy. This symbolic connection meant that imperial physicians, beyond just treating symptoms, were also implicitly tasked with maintaining the emperor's cosmic image. Their success in alleviating his sleeplessness was not just a medical triumph, but a political one, reaffirming the emperor's mandate. Failure, on the other hand, could undermine both their own positions and the emperor's authority. Historians still argue whether the concept of the mandate of heaven was primarily a genuine spiritual belief that shaped imperial conduct, or if it was more a political tool used by ambitious scholars and rebels to justify dynastic change. Regardless of its primary function, its pervasive influence meant that emperors genuinely feared losing their mandate, and the state of their sleep became an involuntary barometer of their perceived divine favor. The psychological stress of this belief alone could certainly contribute to insomnia. The emperor's dreams also played a crucial role in this nexus of sleep, power, and the mandate. As explored earlier, dreams were often seen as messages from heaven or ancestors. Prophetic dreams of auspicious animals or benevolent deities could bolster the emperor's confidence and public image, reinforcing his divine connection. Conversely, recurring nightmares of natural disasters, rebellious figures, or ancestors expressing displeasure would be deeply disturbing, forcing the emperor and his court to contemplate potential failings and placate heaven. Rebellions and periods of unrest, which were seen as signs of the mandate of heaven being withdrawn, were almost certainly periods of extreme sleeplessness for the reigning emperor. You envision a ruler faced with widespread revolt, tossing and turning through the night, haunted by the specter of dynastic collapse, the very foundation of his rule crumbling, and his sleep mirroring the chaos outside. The physical manifestations of stress and anxiety would naturally disrupt rest, thus fulfilling the prophecy of the lost mandate. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy of cosmic proportions. The emperor's capacity for diligence and endurance, often demonstrated through his ability to work long hours with minimal sleep, was sometimes interpreted as a sign of his virtue and commitment to his people, further reinforcing his claim to the mandate. A lazy or indolent emperor who indulged in excessive sleep could be seen as neglecting his duties and therefore losing his divine favor. This created a paradoxical pressure to sleep well enough to be effective, but not so much as to appear lazy. The ritualistic nature of imperial life, including the meticulous bedtime routines and the sanctity of the bedchamber, was also part of this reinforcement of the mandate of heaven. By adhering to ancient protocols and maintaining an aura of serene order, the emperor projected an image of cosmic harmony, which was integral to his divine right to rule. Even the quiet, disciplined movements of eunuchs and guards around his sleeping quarters contributed to this perception of an ordered universe centered around the Son of Heaven. In moments of dynastic transition, particularly when a new dynasty rose. The founders often emphasized their own virtue and the previous dynasty's corruption and misrule, including references to the former emperor's personal failings, like excessive indulgence or neglect of duties, which would include proper sleep and health. A new emperor would typically present himself as energetic, diligent, and, by implication, divinely chosen, ready to embody the renewed mandate of heaven. As you conclude your exploration of sleep, power, and the mandate of heaven, you gain a profound understanding of how something as fundamentally human as rest became imbued with immense political and spiritual significance in imperial China. For the emperors, sleep was never just personal. It was a constant, subtle negotiation with the heavens, a public barometer of their virtue, and a silent testament to their legitimate right to rule. Their dreams were prophecies, their insomnia a warning, and their peaceful slumber the ultimate sign of divine favor. It makes you consider the invisible burdens that even the most powerful individuals carry into their quietest moments. As our journey through the strange sleep habits of Chinese emperors draws to a close, you now stand at the threshold of reflection, contemplating the legacy of imperial slumber. How do these peculiar, often extreme, nightly routines and beliefs from millennia past continue to fascinate us? And what do they tell us about power, humanity, and the enduring quest for a good night's rest, even today? You sense a quiet echo of their world in our own, a timeless connection through the universal act of sleep. You find yourself in a contemplative space, perhaps a quiet museum gallery showcasing ancient imperial artifacts, or a library filled with historical texts. From Qin Shi Huang's mercury-fueled wakefulness to the Han Emperor's prophetic dreams, the Three Kingdoms' power naps, the Tang's opulent rituals, the Song's scholarly insomnia, the Yuan's nomadic adaptability, the Ming's rigid schedules. Yet, common threads weave through them all. Mainstream historical fact, the detailed historical records kept by Chinese imperial courts, including chroniclers, medical texts, and personal accounts, though often filtered, provide an unparalleled insight into the daily lives of emperors, encompassing their sleep patterns. This wealth of documentation allows modern historians and sleep scientists to analyze ancient sleep behaviors, comparing them to contemporary understanding of rest, stress, and human physiology. You marvel at the foresight of these ancient scribes, inadvertently creating a historical sleep study for future generations. It's like having access to a reality TV show of imperial bedtime, but with much better costumes and considerably more drama. One of the enduring fascinations is how deeply ingrained the concept of sleep was in the broader cosmic and political order. For these emperors, rest wasn't just a physical necessity. This holistic view, where a troubled mind could literally signify a troubled kingdom, forced emperors into a constant state of vigilance, even in their most vulnerable moments. You consider how, even today, leaders are scrutinized for their energy levels, their perceived resilience, and their ability to function under pressure. Modern echoes of the ancient imperial anxieties about appearing well-rested and in control. A quirky tidbit that demonstrates the cyclical nature of these ideas. Even in modern China, there's a cultural emphasis on concepts like qi and balance, yin and yang, that can influence personal health and sleep habits. While emperors no longer have court geomancers arranging their beds, many Chinese homes still consider feng shui for bedroom layouts, or use traditional herbal remedies for insomnia. You realize that some of these seemingly strange imperial habits aren't entirely alien, but rather deeply embedded cultural practices that have evolved and persisted through millennia. So, next time you adjust your bed for better energy flow, you're unwittingly carrying on an imperial tradition, the evolution of imperial sleep. Habits also reflects the changing nature of governance and the challenges faced by each dynasty. The urgent, strategic naps of the Three Kingdoms were a direct response to constant warfare. The scholarly insomnia of the Song mirrored their intellectual focus and external threats. The strict routines of the Ming reflected their emphasis on control and tradition after foreign rule. This adaptability, or lack thereof, reveals not just personal quirks, but the broader historical currents that shaped an entire empire. Historians still argue whether the extreme isolation and ritualization of imperial sleep ultimately benefited or harmed the emperors. While the elaborate security and care certainly protected them physically, the psychological toll of constant surveillance, lack of genuine privacy, and the immense pressure to embody cosmic harmony must have been immense. Did this environment lead to detached rulers, prone to misjudgment, or did it forge incredibly resilient and focused leaders? The answer, like most historical debates, is likely complex and varied, depending on the individual emperor. The roles of eunuchs, concubines, and imperial physicians underscore the fact that imperial sleep was never a solitary act. It was a carefully managed ecosystem of individuals whose lives revolved around ensuring the emperor's rest. You reflect on the hidden human cost of such grand imperial systems. Elaborate incense, soothing music, and strategic power naps reminds you of humanity's enduring struggle with sleep, regardless of wealth or power. The emperors, for all their might, were still human, subject to the same biological needs and psychological stresses as anyone else. Their desperate attempts to control or enhance their sleep mirror our own modern obsession with sleep apps and ever-new remedies for insomnia. The legacy of imperial Chinese sleep habits offers a unique lens through which to view history. It challenges us to look beyond the grand narratives of battles and politics and consider the more intimate, often unseen, forces that shaped leadership and destiny. So as the last echoes of ancient palace life fade and the final image of a sleeping emperor settles into your mind, you are left with a lingering thought. Whether it was a restless Qin Shi Huang fearing assassins, a dreaming Han emperor seeking divine guidance, or a meticulously prepared Qing ruler aligning his bed. For good fortune, their sleep was never truly their own. It was a reflection of their power, their vulnerability, and their inextricable link to the fate of their vast empire. And perhaps, as you finally drift off to sleep tonight, you'll carry with you a newfound appreciation for the quiet, unburdened simplicity of your own rest, free from the cosmic anxieties and intricate protocols of imperial slumber. Slowly, the whispers of ancient dynasties soften, dissolving like mist over distant mountains. The clinking of jade, the rustle of silk, the soft padding of silent feet all recede into the vast quiet. Your own eyelids begin to feel heavy, a gentle weight pulling you deeper into your sanctuary of calm. The grand halls, the watchful eunuchs, the anxious concubines, they all dim, becoming mere shadows at the edges of your awareness. There's no longer any pressure to interpret dreams or to worry about the mandate of heaven. Only the gentle hum of your own breath, the steady rhythm of your heart. Allow the soft darkness to embrace you, knowing that your journey through history has reached its peaceful end. Let go of every thought, every lingering image, and surrender to the profound stillness that awaits.